Good morning, folks. I'm Dan. Today we're reassembling our Remington 1187. We'll get it put back together and test fired. I've already cleaned up all the parts. They've been through the solvent tank. Getting ready, the first thing we're going to do is stake our shell latch back in place. And I don't know if I'm going to get you in close enough to really be able to see it, but we're going to set our shell latch in place. We'll get you into where you can see it a little bit. I'm not going to get too detailed about it. This will be something that I'll cover in more depth in another video. Your shell latch is going to sit back in place, and you got to be sure and have the front end in place. It will set behind the edge of the chamber itself, or the edge of the barrel on the outside of that, and yet inside the receiver. You use your front trigger pin to hold that in alignment. I think that looks a little bit better. Yep, that is indeed where it goes. And then you want to be sure and pad your receiver. There's a couple of different ways you can stake these. This happens to be my preferred method after umpteen million years. Where you want to be sure and not crush the area that goes into the slide rails. There we go. And that's all it takes to hold those in position. There's 6 staking points on the insides of these. I will normally only stake 4. And verify everything works, and then we go through the pin. The pin goes through the hole, and that shell latch is staked back in place. Now we can go ahead with the rest of the assembly of this. Let's move it back where we were, and we'll put the back end together. Back end will go just together like it was. We want a light coating of lubricant on everything. Our piston will go back in first. Set it in. We've got our recoil spring, light coating of lubricant. That will go in there. Our retainers are double-ended. It's got a little step downs on either end so that it will go in there. Our notch, of course, lines up with the hole in the recoil spring itself. That's in there. Normally, depending on your screwdriver size, you'll be able to get it started. Pull your screwdriver out, turn it 90 degrees, and set your pin in. That's locked in place. And your piston on the other end sits where it's supposed to be. Spacer that goes on between the receiver and the stock is a stamped out part, so you've got a radius on one side, a little flatter or sharper edge on the other. I will always put that radius down into the recess of the receiver. You always check your buttstock for cracks. Remington guns especially, and a lot of guns, but Remingtons are very prone to it. You'll see them split out across through here, across the back, and there. It's the way the grain goes. If it's a split just around there, or a crack that's propagating, usually on both sides and going back, 99% of the time that's from a loose buttstock. So you always want to be sure and get your buttstock on solid. That's just what always happens with your buttstocks. If they don't, if they're not on there tight, why under recoil it'll pop the top of that. Okay, your buttstock's on. You've got your flat washer, got your crimps or your stakes that go down in. They go into the wood itself because that sets them into the wood a little bit so they don't rotate. They want that washer to go in and stay in position. From there, your lock washer will go on, and then your nut to hold the whole assembly together. And there again, you take your little tool and run it down by hand. A good portion of the time I will assemble a receiver before I put the buttstock on. A couple of reasons to do that is an advantage. One is it protects your buttstock a little bit more. If you've got nice pieces of wood, you don't want to damage them while you're doing work on the rest of the gun. So a lot of times you leave your wood for the last parts to go on. Part of the reason I'm doing it now is I do them this way part of the time, plus we want the camera's already set up at this angle, so I wanted to show this. So we'll go ahead and assemble it here. Your choice as to how you do it. If you put the trigger group in first, it will help align your buttstock. If they're not straight when you put them together, why you may have trouble getting that stock aligned. This one fits real tight, so that's not going to be an issue. So we'll tighten it down hand tight, and then we'll take our wrench. I've got some tooling I'm building for these. For years and years, I've used just a flat piece, just like this, with a crescent wrench or an adjustable wrench. I've since developed some tooling that sits on a socket that I think is a little bit better than some of the stuff you can buy. So I'll be turning some of those out here directly. But you want your buttstock to be tight. You don't want to be McGilly Gorilla to it, but you don't want it to move. So that'll take care of that. That's in position. From there, our recoil pad can go back on. As I said before, if you need to go ahead and seal the back end of the stock, this one's in good shape. If your stock screws or your recoil pad screws have been stripped out, you want to repair those in some manner. This one was good as I took it apart, so we'll just start that screw there, get that screw going. There again, lube your pad so you don't tear the edges of the pad, so it's not crumbling away any sooner than it needs to be. Make sure your pad's aligned when you put it back together, as close as you can with the buttstock. And the back end of the gun's reassembled. Okay. Now, your magazine cap goes in next. There again, your slots have to line up with the slots in the mag tube on these later style guns. That goes in. There again, I like just a little bit of lube on the action spring. Too much and you're picking up a bunch of crap while you're out in the field, a lot of dirt and everything, but a little bit I think helps lube it and does a little bit nicer job with it. So that spring goes back in. Your magazine plug will go in, and then your magazine cap. This is kind of awkward for the camera. There again, this would all normally be done in the vise set up in there. So anyway, when I disassemble them, so there's only one place you've got slots at 90 degrees all the way around. Half of them at 180 degrees apart don't go all the way through, so that's your retainer. So you slide it past the, so at that position it won't go, this is the one we've got. One position it will slide down in. You have to go clear to the bottom, past those detent nubbins, turn it 90 degrees, it comes out and it retains right there. There your four ends. All the front end of that gun is back together. For the trigger group, what do we have here for parts? That goes with the barrel, that goes out front there. So we've got we call it a pickle fork. It's the link that goes back together. And you'll find these a lot of the time. I said that the ears would break off. In actuality, one of these legs will occasionally break off. You'll take these out, and especially on older guns, you'll find sharp edges. Sometimes here where it's ridden against the bolt. A lot of times along these edges, they've sharpened up. Either part of them were left from the factory, and part of them were just sharp edges that have worn in over time. So I will normally take a little diamond file, just smooth over those edges, mainly just so I don't get cutted. I don't know that it really affects. Anytime you're doing anything like that, you want to be sure and go this way with your file, or your stone, or whatever you're using to it. You don't want to go crossways. Crossways on any springs, anything like that, creates a stress point and they'll crack out there. So anyway, it sets down into the action bar, this side up, or sets down into the slide rail. Grab the ears with a pair of pliers, and it sets right into your spring pocket, into your recoil spring pocket. And that's the assembly for that. We've got our action bar back out of the solvent tank and cleaned up, dried off. Or you want to make sure your fore-end support's in good condition. A lot of times they'll break one ear off and it kind of flops. It can jam the gun up. Otherwise, you just look it over, make sure there's nothing broken. I have seen them break ears off of here, but then they'll separate into two pieces. It's very obvious if they've broken. This is, your bolt sits on top, of course, like that. And this is what retains your bolt handle. It snaps in just like that. and the detent on how tight that action or that bolt handle is set right there. There's a spring-loaded detent ball in there. I have seen them be very loose in a gun, and sometimes you can make some adjustments there. I do like just a little bit of lube there on it to work itself down in along the action bars, and I add a little bit more lubricant when I put those together. As far as the bolt and the firing pin, I'll give it just a little bit of lube down the firing pin spring, a little bit in the top of the extractor, just to work it down in there a little bit. Your bolt goes back onto your action bar, and then that assembly will slide back in. This tube remains clean and dry. Remington style guns, the 1100s, 1187s, 870s, that tube should be clean and dry. So there's that portion of it. We get to there. Charging handle goes back in. That's clear and ready to go. Trigger group, we just ran it through the ultrasonic cleaner, cleaned it out. I lube all the moving components on the hammer sear engagement surfaces. I use just a little bit of grease, and there again, it's just what I've learned to use over the years, what I found works best for me, and all you want's just a little bit on those components. It lubricates them a little bit better, and that's ready to go back together. When you slide these into these guns, the disconnector sticks out from the side, so you kind of ease that down in and make sure it clears everything as you go. They will sit right in. They can be kind of tight going in and coming out. You just want to be careful you don't force anything to where it's not going to work, and they'll go together. There again, it doesn't really matter which side the pins go through on a Remington. See, that one's not wanting to line up, and that may be part of that shell latch hanging just a little bit. There we go. That part of it's done. Our action's all ready to go. Okay, we'll set that section aside, and all we've got's the final assembly on the barrel. First thing I like to do is double check our choke tubes. We've cleaned that all out. Choke tube should always be lubed. You can use regular choke tube lube. I like a liberal coating on the choke tube just to make sure they don't seize in place. They can go back together. You can use your high-end quarter to reassemble them if you choose. And I will still seat it with a quarter. Here at the bench, I'll use a speed wrench a lot of the time. It goes right in like that. Just about that tight. Clean off that lube. And when you tighten these down, just about that tight. Just hand tight. They don't need to be torqued in place. You don't want to overdo them. Some guns will work that choke tube out. I tell everybody to make it a habit if you're in the field to just periodically check, through the day. It doesn't take you but a little bit to figure out if your choke tube will work out. Some will, some won't. So if they do, why, you just hand tighten them again. That's all it takes. You don't want to really reef them down in there to where they won't come out, because then when you want them to after they've been fired and you've got some carbon buildup on them, why, then they won't come out. So barrel's ready to go. I had previously polished that chamber out. Another thing on Remington, especially semi-automatic shotguns, Remington semi-automatic rifles are the same way. Your gas ports are down in here, and this particular one has 2 gas ports. They vary port sizes, or vary number of ports, and they vary dimensions depending on what the application is. When you get the older 1100s, some of the 1187s, but it's predominantly with the older 1100s, you will have function problems with them. Those port sizes can be adjusted. and I'm not going to get into that right now because that's a more advanced subject. I recommend that you don't mess with port sizing on them. The gun's designed to operate in a certain pressure range, and when you start adjusting those port sizes, you can make a gun function that would not function with certain loads previously. But what you've done is you've ended up and had to open up those port sizes to get it to do that. So when you go back to a heavier load that the gun was actually designed to shoot originally from the manufacturer, why then if the gun will function at all, you're just beating the snot out of it because you're directing way too much gas pressure through them then. So that's kind of an advanced subject there. Again, I don't recommend anybody messing with port sizing until you really know what's going on. So it's taken me a lot of years to figure out what to do with port sizing. There are recommendations out there for what port sizes to open up to on certain applications. It has merit. There are times when you have to do that, but I don't really recommend it at all. If I can avoid changing port sizing on anything, I certainly will. We've got our rings and our seal to go back on, and we had previously found this broken seal. That's the one we took out, big chunk out of it. The way they're supposed to look is together there with just a slot. So that will go back on. Remington for a while came out with an assembly that it was a little bit different than this grouping here. It was two pieces, but they were captive together. It had an inner section, and then it had a retaining ring around the outside of some sort. I believe that's been discontinued from Remington. I think that was not the answer that Remington thought they were going to have with that. So anyway, we replaced this bottom seal. I didn't replace the upper one. Under heavy use, sometimes you'll see these be pitted out in between. If a gun doesn't want to function, sometimes you can help that by closing up those tolerances by replacing both of those parts. The seal I'm replacing. Sometimes you have to replace the seal. It used to be, when I had the shop running, it was normal procedure. You just replace that seal. Every time you did a clean the service, that was one thing you replaced. It's a good idea. It's a cheap part. This one I replaced because this one has a couple little flat spots that's been squished out. I don't know if that's going to show up on the camera or not. But anyway, the seal would probably work fine. There again, cheap replacement. I'm not going to worry about it. Throw that one away, put a new one on. From there, your barrel goes back on. Just like that. Your cap goes back on. These ideally should be retained. The early ones stayed in place usually. I noticed the later ones would release from that position. From there we take our fore end that we had previously fitted down in part one. There again, we'll put that link back up there in a card up above. It slides on all the way it's supposed to. I like that fit, much better. Our magazine cap goes back on. All the way down by hand, not wrench tied on there, by hand. And that gun's ready to go. That feels better than when we took it apart. I will test fire this gun and make sure it's good, and then it can go back in the safe. If you find these videos useful, you might hit that subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up if you like them. And if you hit the bell notification, you'll know when I put out a new video. Any comments, suggestions, complaints, things I've done wrong, leave them in the comments section for me below. I look forward to hearing from you. And thanks for taking the time to watch.